the reason I mention it as much as anything else is that it seems that the people who have the megaphones, particularly in the media and in academia, who are driving a lot of the debate at the moment, refuse to give us the whole picture. The whole picture about the African Americans who are doing well, who don't share what are so-called, what are now called progressive values, that feel comfortable in the society that they're in. You never hear about that. And it just seems that without the complete picture, you fall victim to some of this language that's around, to come to a couple of terms that are bandied around with incredible abandon at the moment, systemic racism and white privilege. And you yourself recently said, I think along these lines, structural racism, by contrast, is a bluff. It's not an engagement with history, it's a bullying tactic. In effect, it's telling you to shut up. I thought those were very interesting observations. So you're saying that these are tactics designed to, say, fall into line with our perspective on the debate, don't enter into a wide-ranging, truly helicopter view of what's happening, good and bad.
That's right. People say structural racism. Let me be specific. They look at the prisons. About 40% of the people incarcerated in the United States are Black, and Blacks are about 12% of the population. So that's a vast overrepresentation in the prisons. And they say structural racism, as if citing the overrepresentation of Blacks amongst those who are held in prison proved that the system was racist, and not that Blacks participated in criminal offending at a higher rate, were being apprehended as a consequence, and therefore were being represented in prison at a higher rate because they were more likely to commit criminal offenses. Now, the latter happens to be the case. That is to say, while there is certainly some racial discrimination in American criminal justice, criminologists have looked high and low to try to find evidence that the disparity in prisons is due to racial discrimination, and they cannot demonstrate that because the disparity in criminal offending is itself off the charts, with Blacks being vastly overrepresented amongst those committing violent crimes. Now, you can call that structural racism if you want, but what I say to people who say that is, you're not trying to explain anything. This is a rhetorical move that you're making. You think by using those words, we're going to change the subject from, in the case at hand, the example that I'm giving, the criminal behavior of a relatively few Black people, relatively few compared to a population of 40 million, the criminal behavior, you're going to change the subject from that to something about, and then you're going to start talking about slavery and about redlining and about, anti-Black bias and whatnot, when in fact, what we really need to deal with, what we really need to confront as a society, sympathetically, putting resources into it if necessary, is the foundations of the behavioral deviance which has produced this outcome. So we're not going to have an argument when people are talking about structural racism about the behavior of the criminals. We're going to have an argument about the system. They want to blame the system for everything. That is both false as a social scientific matter. The causal arrows don't go in the directions that they're claiming. It's also devastating as a political matter, I argue, because just about everybody listening to this conversation knows that what you're saying is BS.
Yep.
They know it's not true. They know what's going on.
Yeah. And you talk about those disparities there in the numbers. What is it, 12% of the population, 40% of the jail population. The other one that hits you in the face is Warren Farrell's point. Males are half the population of any given society, roughly, but 85% of the inmates in American jails, and I suspect it's much the same in Australia, are male. What is the boy crisis? What is the male crisis? No one talks about that. And again, it comes back, I think, to the issue of who is modelling appropriate behaviour to these boys as they grow up. But just to come to a couple of other things that you've said that I find incredibly interesting, you recently said that you can live with disparities or you can live in totalitarianism. And can I draw you out? Why do you think the project of removing disparities or bringing about equality between identity groups would lead or tend to lead us towards totalitarianism?
Taken to its logical extreme, I argue it would lead toward totalitarianism, because I argue that groups actually are different in ways that inescapably produce inequality. Look at Asian immigrants' success in elite academic venues in the United States.
Yep.
There's a lawsuit now where Harvard is in court, and a consortium of Asian American students are suing, saying that Harvard University, the greatest university in the country, is discriminating against them because only a quarter of the Harvard student body or so is of Asian American descent. And if they went by academic test scores, they would be half of the, I give the rough numbers, it may be off by a percent or two. They'd be half of the student body. If you admitted strictly on academic merit, Asians would be twice as prevalent at Harvard, and they would be half of the students at Harvard. And as it is, they're about a quarter. So they're in court suing. Now, why is that? Why are there so many Jews who are at the forefront of various venues of intellectual competition in the United States? Why is that? Genetic arguments are off the table, and I'm not making one here. I wouldn't go there. That would be the last place that I would go. As a social scientist, I have to allow the evidence to determine my answer to that. But let me bracket the question of whether or not there are natural differences between human populations that are implicated in these disparities. There are huge cultural disparities between these populations. How the children are raised, what things are valued in the community, what aspirations are embraced, how hard do people work, how do they deal with their setbacks, what kind of resilience do they have, etc. Are they worried about disappointing their parents' expectations? Are the parents supervising their behavior in the household to ensure that they apply themselves in ways that maximize the chance of developing their talents? These things are vastly different between human population groups within the United States, and I expect within any society. People who say that every disparity is an evidence of historical wrong are in effect ignoring the differences between these human populations that are reflected in their achievements. So you can try to eliminate the achievement differences between these populations, but you can only do it by stifling and damping down and extirpating the behavioral patterns within the population groups that produce the differences in the first place. And when you do that, you're on a slippery slope to tyranny. You're saying the parents who want to spend half of their available income on their child development can't spend that much. They can't send a kid to a special school. They can't hire a tutor. You're saying kids who want to spend 8 hours a day studying instead of 4 hours a day of studying somehow have to be limited from doing that. If you don't control the micro environment within which human development takes place so as to eliminate the differences across the groups and the outcomes, you're not going to get rid of the disparities. So that's what, I mean, it's a theoretical point. I say if you insist on leveling so that all disparities are flattened and eliminated, what you're going to have at the end of the day is tyranny.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.